My name is Ethan, I'm 25, and for 3 years I've been hiding a secret that's been eating me up inside. It all started in a small Texas town when I, a 22-year-old, fell in love with someone I had no right to love, my sister's fiancé. It's a story of unrequited love, betrayal, and fighting for yourself in a world where the truth can destroy everything you know. My name's Ethan, I'm 25 now, and for the past 3 years, I've been carrying a secret that's been eating me alive, gnawing at my insides like rust on old metal. It all started when I was 22, back in a speck of a town in Texas where the sun baked the earth dry and the wind carried whispers faster than truth. Me and my sister, Sofia, lived in a weathered house on the edge of town, a place we'd clung to after our parents died in a crash when I was 17. She was 4 years older, my anchor, the one who'd pulled me through the wreckage of that loss. We were a team, just the two of us against a world that didn't care, until David showed up and turned everything upside down. Sofia met him at the Greasy Spoon Diner where she picked up weekend shifts. He was 32, a carpenter with broad shoulders and a smile that could charm the devil himself. I still remember the night she brought him home, his work boots thumping on our sagging porch, his deep voice cutting through the quiet as he stuck out his hand. "Hey, Ethan, good to meet you," he said, his grip strong, his gray-green eyes catching mine for a second too long. I shook it off, told myself it was nothing, just a guy being friendly. But something about him lodged in me, sharp and unmovable, like a splinter under a nail. They hit it off fast. Sofia had always been careful with guys, her heart guarded after years of picking up the pieces, ours and hers. But David was different. He'd show up with a handful of wildflowers he'd yanked from the roadside, fix the screen door that had been creaking since Dad was alive, sit with her on our lumpy couch watching reruns of shows she loved. She'd laugh, really laugh, a sound I hadn't heard since we were kids, and I'd catch myself staring at them from across the room, pretending to mess with my phone. I wanted to be happy for her. God knows I tried. But every time he'd glance my way or toss me a casual, "You good, man?" my chest tightened, like I was choking on something I couldn't spit out. The town didn't help. It was one of those places where everybody knew your name and your sins before you even confessed them. Church was king. Sofia dragged me there every Sunday, her faith a lifeline after Mom and Dad were gone. The preacher's voice would boom about hellfire and righteousness, and I'd sit there, hands clenched in my lap, feeling the weight of eyes that didn't even know what they were looking for. I'd figured out I was gay at 15, sneaking glances at guys in the locker room while I fumbled with my shoelaces. It was a truth I'd buried deep, locked away in a box I swore I'd never open. In a place like that, being me wasn't just hard, it was dangerous. So I kept quiet, played the part, let Sofia think I was just her shy little brother who hadn't found the right girl yet. Then David moved in closer, not into the house yet, but into her life, into ours. He'd started coming around more, helping with chores, cracking beers with us on the porch after a long day. He was good to me too, asked about my job at the auto shop, ribbed me about my scrawny arms. "Gotta put some muscle on you, kid," he'd say, grinning as he slapped my shoulder. I'd laugh, shove him off, but his touch lingered, warm and heavy, and I'd turn away quick so he wouldn't see the flush creeping up my neck. I told myself it was nothing, just a stupid crush I could starve out. But it wasn't nothing. It was a spark, and I was dry tinder waiting to catch. Sofia didn't see it. She was too busy falling, her eyes bright with a joy I hadn't seen in her since before the crash. "He's good for us, Ethan," she'd say, squeezing my arm as she stirred a pot of chili on the stove. "Don't you think?" I'd nod, force a smile, and say, "Yeah, he's all right." But inside, I was unraveling. Every time he walked through the door, every time his voice filled the house, that box I'd locked shut started to rattle. I'd known I was different for years, prayed it away in those hard pews, begged God to make me normal. He didn't listen. And now David was here, cracking me open without even trying, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold it together. Sofia and David got engaged a year after they met, and by then, he was a fixture in our lives. It happened fast, too fast for me to brace myself. One sticky July evening, he dropped to one knee on our patchy front lawn, a cheap ring glinting in the dusk. Sofia cried, said yes, and I stood there, clapping with her handful of friends, my throat so tight I could barely swallow. She hugged me after, her arms warm and familiar, whispering, "We're gonna be a real family now, Ethan." I nodded, hugged her back, but all I could feel was David's eyes on me, steady and unreadable, like he knew something I didn't. He moved in a month later, his stuff piling up in our cramped house, his toolbox in the garage, his faded jackets on the hooks by the door, his coffee mug next to hers on the counter. The place shifted, filled with his presence, and Sofia glowed brighter than ever. She'd hum while she cooked, her voice threading through the rooms, tying us together. David fit right in, grilling steaks out back, fixing the loose boards on the porch, laughing that deep, easy laugh that made her light up. To her, he was a gift, a second chance at something solid after years of just getting by. To me, he was a storm I couldn't outrun. I tried to keep my head down, stay out of his orbit. I'd take extra shifts at the auto shop, come home late smelling of oil and sweat, anything to dodge the pull I felt every time he was near. But there was no escaping him. He'd call me out to the garage. "Ethan, grab a screwdriver, man." And I'd go, telling myself it was normal, just helping out. Then his hand would graze mine as he handed me a tool, or he'd lean in close, showing me how to fix something, his breath warm against my cheek. My heart would slam against my ribs, loud enough I was sure he'd hear it. I'd catch myself staring, the way his shirt stuck to him when he worked, the flex of his forearms under the Texas sun. It wasn't just how he looked, it was him, his quiet strength, the way he'd look at me like I mattered. I'd known I was gay for years, a secret I'd choked down since I was a kid sneaking glances in gym class. By 15, I'd named it, but in our town, that name was a death sentence. The church Sofia loved so much made sure I knew where I stood. Every Sunday, the preacher's voice thundered about sin, about flames waiting for people like me. I'd sit there, nails digging into my palms, praying for it to stop, for me to be someone else. It never worked. I'd kept it buried, locked tight, because losing Sofia wasn't an option. She was my sister, my family, the one person who never let me fall. But David was prying that lock open, and I was terrified of what it'd spill out. It started small, these moments that stacked up like kindling. One night, he caught me sketching in the kitchen, dumb little drawings of the scrubland behind the house. "Damn, Ethan, you've got talent," he said, leaning over my shoulder, his voice low and close. My pencil slipped, scratching the page. Another time, we were out back, him sweating through a tank top as he split firewood, me stacking it like I knew what I was doing. He tossed me a water bottle, grinned, and said, "You're tougher than you act, you know that?" My stomach flipped, and I mumbled something incoherent, turning away so he wouldn't see my face go red. The dreams were the worst. I'd wake up in the dark, chest heaving, his voice in my head, rough and warm, saying my name. I'd stumble to the sink, splash cold water on my face, stare at my reflection and hiss, "Get it together. This is wrong." He was Sofia's fiancé, soon her husband, the man who'd made her whole again. And here I was, rotting with guilt, wanting him in ways I couldn't even say out loud. I'd lie awake after, counting cracks in the ceiling, telling myself I could kill it, this ache, this need, if I just tried harder. But it wouldn't die. It grew, twisting deeper every time he'd catch my eye across the room or laugh at some dumb joke I'd made. I started pulling away. I'd eat in my room, skip the garage hangouts, dodge his "Hey, let's watch the game" invites. He noticed, how could he not? One afternoon, he cornered me in the hall, arms crossed, brow creased. "You alright, Ethan? You've been quiet lately." His tone was soft, worried, and it sliced right through me. I wanted to shove him, yell at him to back off, to stop making me feel this way. Instead, I shrugged, muttered, "Just tired," and slipped past him. He didn't push, but his gaze followed me, heavy and searching, and I felt it cling to me like damp heat. I couldn't keep this up, hiding, pretending. Something was going to break, and I was scared it'd be me. The air in the house had thickened, heavy with things I couldn't say and didn't want to feel. Sofia and David's wedding was a month away, and she was a whirlwind, planning on a shoestring, her excitement spilling over into every corner. She'd come home from the clinic, eyes bright, chattering about flowers and vows, while David nodded along, his steady calm balancing her storm. I'd watch from the sidelines, a ghost in my own home, trying to bury the ache that flared every time he was near. I'd gotten better at hiding, short answers, quick exits, eyes anywhere but on him. Sofia didn't notice, she was too caught up in her future. But David did. I could feel it in the way he'd pause, watching me, like he was waiting for something to give. It all fell apart on a Friday night I'll never shake. Sofia got called into the clinic for an emergency shift, some kid with a broken leg, and she rushed out, leaving me and David alone. I'd planned to hole up in my room, lock the door, drown out the world with music. But he knocked before I could disappear. "Ethan, you up for pizza? I'm starving," he called, his voice easy, like it was any other night. I should have said no. Should have stayed safe behind that door. But my stomach growled, and my willpower was fraying. "Yeah, sure," I muttered, stepping into a night that'd burn everything down. We sat on the couch, the TV flickering with a game neither of us watched. A greasy pizza box sat between us, the smell of pepperoni mixing with the tension I couldn't shake. He cracked open a beer, handed me one, and our fingers brushed, quick, accidental, but enough to jolt me. Our knees bumped as he shifted, and he didn't pull away. The room felt smaller, the air buzzing like a live wire. He started talking, about my sketches, my shifts at the shop, my life. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes sharp, cutting through me. I took a swig of beer, stalling. "Sometimes. Nowhere to go, though." He leaned closer, his arms stretching along the back of the couch, close enough I could feel the heat off him. "You're better than this town, Ethan. Someone's gonna see that." My breath caught, stuck in my throat. His words hung there, loaded, and when I turned to him, his face was inches away, those gray-green eyes locked on mine, searching, pulling. Then he kissed me. It was sudden, hard, his lips crashing into mine, his hand gripping my shoulder like he'd been holding back as long as I had. For one heartbeat I gave in, years of want surging up, drowning out the guilt. His stubble scraped my skin, his breath hot and ragged. But then he jerked back, eyes wide with panic. "Shit, I'm sorry," he rasped, scrambling to his feet. "I didn't mean fuck." He stumbled to the kitchen, leaving me there, heart pounding, world tilting off its axis. I sat frozen, the taste of him still on my lips, my mind screaming two things at once. He feels it too, and this is wrong. I didn't sleep that night, replaying it, the heat, the regret in his voice, the way my walls had crumbled in that split second. Part of me soared. He'd crossed the line I'd never dared to. But the rest of me sank, drowning in dread. Sofia. My sister. The one person I'd sworn to protect, and I'd just betrayed her in the worst way. Morning crept in, gray and heavy, and I was still on the couch when the front door creaked open. Sofia was back, earlier than expected. I heard her gasp before I saw her. David's phone was on the counter, screen glowing with a text he'd sent to a buddy. "Ethan's been looking at me weird. Almost messed up tonight." She'd seen it before he could snatch it. "Ethan?" Her voice was a whisper, trembling, her eyes darting between us. David stammered. "It's not what it looks like." But I couldn't lie. "Not now." I nodded, slow and numb, and her face crumpled. A sob tore out of her, raw and broken, and she gripped the counter like it was all that kept her standing. "My brother? My fiancé?" she choked out, tears streaming down her cheeks. "How could you do this?" David reached for her, but she shoved him back, hard. "Don't you dare touch me!" she screamed, her voice cracking. She spun to me, her eyes burning with hurt and rage. "I trusted you, Ethan. You were my family, my everything, and you—" She couldn't finish, her words dissolving into a wail. I opened my mouth, tried to explain that I'd fought it, hated myself for it, but she cut me off. "You're a liar!" she spat, the words slicing deep. She grabbed her keys, stormed to their room, and came back with a bag slung over her shoulder. "I can't be here," she said, her voice hollow, dead. "Not with you. Either of you." The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the empty house. David sank onto the couch, head in his hands, muttering, "I didn't want this." I stared at him, cold and hollowed out. "Then why'd you do it?" I asked, my voice flat. He didn't answer, just shook his head, and the silence swallowed us. My secret was out, a bomb that had blown my life apart. Sofia was gone, David was a shell, and I was the spark that lit it all. Everything I'd held onto, my sister, my home, my place in the world, was ash now, and I didn't know how to crawl out of the ruin. The house went silent after Sofia left, a hollow shell where her voice used to bounce off the walls. David stuck around for a day, pacing like a trapped animal, his apologies falling flat and useless. "I didn't mean for this, Ethan," he muttered, his voice rough and tired, like he'd run out of fight. I didn't say a word. What was there to say? He'd kissed me, cracked my world open, and now we were both bleeding out in the mess. By the next morning, he was gone too. I heard his truck growl to life, watched through the blinds as he peeled out of the driveway, his stuff cleared from the bedroom. He didn't look back, just tossed a weak, "Take care," over his shoulder like it meant something. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was alone, surrounded by the wreckage of everything I'd known, the weight of it all pinning me down. I thought that was the worst of it, losing Sofia, losing David, losing the fragile balance we'd built. I was wrong. Word spread fast, a wildfire racing through the dry grass of our small town. Sofia must have said something, to a coworker, a friend, someone, because by Monday the whispers started. I felt it first at the auto shop. My boss, a grizzled guy named Roy, called me into his office, wouldn't meet my eyes. "People are talking, Ethan," he said, shifting in his chair. "About you and your sister's man. I can't have that kind of trouble here." Just like that, I was out, no warning, no second chance. I grabbed my toolbox and walked out, head down, catching the mechanic's mutter, "Freak," as the door swung shut behind me. It didn't stop there. The town turned on me like a pack scenting blood. At the gas station, the clerk who'd always nodded hello now stared through me, her lips tight. A guy from church, someone I'd known since grade school, spat on the ground as I passed. One night, I heard voices outside, low, angry, and peeked out to see a handful of men from the congregation lingering by the porch. They shoved a note under the door, queer, scratched in jagged ink. The next morning, I woke to "FAG," scrawled in red spray paint across the front steps. I scrubbed it off, hands trembling, soap suds mixing with the sting in my eyes, but the words stayed, burned into my head. This wasn't my home anymore, it was a cage, and the bars were closing in. I tried to reach Sofia. I called her phone over and over, left voicemails that broke apart as I spoke. "I'm sorry, Sof. I never wanted this. Please, just talk to me." Nothing. I drove to the clinic, sat in the parking lot until her shift ended, my heart pounding as she walked out. "Sofia," I started, stepping toward her, but her face stopped me cold, hard, closed off, a stranger's. "Go away, Ethan," she said, her voice like ice. "You're not my brother anymore." She brushed past me, her shoulder knocking mine, and I stood there, gutted, watching her vanish into the twilight. My sister, my lifeline, was gone, and I'd cut the rope myself. Days blurred into nights. I stopped leaving the house, kept the curtains drawn, let the phone battery die. The fridge sat empty, but I didn't care. Hunger was a dull ache compared to the hole in my chest. I'd collapse on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying that night with David, the kiss, the panic, the way it had felt like freedom until it turned to ash. I hated him for starting it, for running when it blew up. But I hated myself more. I'd let it happen, let my feelings fester until they torched everything I loved. Sofia's voice looped in my skull. "You're a liar!" And maybe she was right. I was a liar, a coward, a stain on her life. The breaking point came one evening when I heard a truck idle outside, then a thud against the door. I opened it to find a brick wrapped in paper. "Leave or else." My hands shook as I unfolded it, the threat sinking in like cold water. This wasn't just talk anymore, it was real. I'd heard the stories, guys roughed up for less, chased out with split lips and busted ribs. I couldn't stay, couldn't wait to see how far they'd go. That night, I packed a bag, some clothes, my sketchbook, the $30 I'd stashed in a drawer. I took one last look around, the faded quilt Sofia had loved, the scuff on the floor from when we danced as kids. It wasn't home now, just a ghost of what it had been. I grabbed the keys to my rattling old Ford, threw the bag in the back, and drove into the dark. No plan, no goodbye, just the hum of the engine and the road stretching out like a lifeline. The town shrank in my rearview, a blur of lights and judgment, and I kept going, running from Sofia's hurt, David's cowardice, and the kid I'd been, scared, silent, ashamed. I didn't know where I'd land, but I knew I couldn't look back. Whatever was left of me had to start over, somewhere far from the ashes I'd left behind. The road south was a black ribbon under a moonless sky, my Ford coughing like it might quit any mile. I didn't stop until Austin's skyline blinked into view, a sprawl of lights and noise, a city big enough to swallow me whole. I pulled into a dingy motel off the highway, traded my last $10 for a room with a flickering bulb and a mattress that sagged like defeat. That first night, I lay there, Sofia's words, "You're not my brother anymore," carving into me, sharp and relentless. I'd lost everything, her, the house, the kid I'd been, and the emptiness felt like it had never let go. I needed cash, so I pounded the pavement, handing out resumes with hands still shaky from the drive. A dive bar downtown took me on as a dishwasher, scrubbing plates, hauling trash, dodging the chaos of late-night drunks. The pay was scraps, but it kept me moving, kept my mind from sinking too deep. That's where I met Riley. He was a waiter, wiry and quick with a grin that cut through the grime. One night, after a brutal shift, he slid me a soda and said, "You've got that look, man, like you're running from a ghost." I tensed, but his eyes were kind, no edge. "Just needed a change," I mumbled. He nodded, didn't pry. "Well, you're here now. That's what counts." Riley was out, gay and loud about it, no apologies, no fear. Over beers after closing, he told me how he'd been tossed out at 16, scraped by on the streets until Austin took him in. "This place doesn't give a damn who you are," he said, clinking his bottle against mine. "It just wants you to keep going." His words stuck, a lifeline I didn't expect. He dragged me to a punk show one night, introduced me to his crew, misfits who'd all clawed their way out of something. I spilled my story, David, Sofia, the town that chewed me up, and they didn't blink. "Their loss," one said, and I felt the knot in my chest loosen, just a little. I found a group too, a rundown community center with an LGBT meetup. The room was full of people like me, stories of slammed doors, hateful notes, families that turned to strangers. But there was grit there, too. A guy named Theo talked about starting over after his brother trashed his stuff to fix him. A woman, Mara, said her mom called after a decade of silence. "Time doesn't erase it," she told me, "but it dulls the edges." I opened up, about hiding since I was a kid, about David breaking me open, about losing Sofia. They listened, and I breathed freer, like I was shedding a weight I'd carried too long. Months rolled by. I moved into a tiny room above a taco joint, the smell of cumin waking me each morning. The bar bumped me up to busboy, then waiter, and I got good at it, balancing trays, cracking smiles, finding a rhythm. Riley and the group became my tether, pulling me out of the dark. I even tried dating, a shy guy named Caleb who liked my sketches and held my hand under a streetlight. It fizzled out, but it proved I could feel something without shattering. Still, Sofia lingered, a quiet ache, a question I couldn't answer. Would she ever look at me again? One night, alone with a beer and my thoughts, I wrote her a letter. I poured it out, how I'd locked myself away since I was 15, how David had undone me without meaning to, how I'd never wanted to hurt her. "I'm still your brother," I scribbled. "Even if you hate me. I love you, Sof, and I'm sorry." I mailed it, no hope pinned to it, just a need to let it go. It felt like unclenching a fist I'd held tight for years. I kept going, working, laughing with Riley, sketching the city's jagged edges. I wasn't fixed, but I was mending, stitch by messy stitch. Then, a year after I'd run, my phone buzzed. Her name lit up the screen, and my heart stopped. "Ethan?" Her voice was small, fragile. "I got your letter." I braced for the worst, but she said, "I've been thinking. I miss you." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall. We talked, awkward and jagged. She'd left that town too, moved to San Antonio with a friend, trying to rebuild. "I don't get it," she said, "but I don't want you gone forever." We agreed to meet someday, no pressure, just a thread to hold. David faded to a whisper. Word was he'd drifted to Oklahoma, chasing jobs, alone with whatever he was running from. He'd broken us, but he'd freed me too. I'd lost so much, Sofia's trust, my old life, my silence, but I'd found something, me. The real me, not the scared kid cowering in a small-town shadow. Austin gave me that, a loud, messy shot at starting over. I'm 25 now, standing straighter, scars and all. The hurt's still there, a soft echo, but so is hope, stubborn and alive. Whatever's next, I'm ready to face it.